Good public transport design principles. Designing a public transport network is an incredibly difficult task. A planner must not only decide where to lay down the routes themselves, but also their mode, frequency, bus stop location, and bus bay design, among others. Furthermore, best practice guides on practical network planning are few and far between. The academic community has had more interest in the engineering and economical aspects of public transport networks than its planning aspects. Despite this, operations research is a venue that is making advances in public network design and has proven its worth in timetabling, as experienced for example in Zurich's public transport system. Furthermore, a public transport planner is surely aided by tools such as Namuts to assess a network, or Remix to measure route attributes such as passenger catchment area, travel time, and operator cost on the fly, making it especially useful during public consultations. In practice, however, operations research does not considerably aid public transport planners because it does not consider the practical planning principles. Public transport design is divided into three hierarchical levels: strategic, tactical, and operational. At the strategic level, the policy of the transport network is set, from which the general network design takes shape. At this stage, the politician has to decide what the aim of public transportation is. Is it merely a basic social commitment for those that are not able to drive, and therefore its mere existence is sufficient? Or is it a means to alleviate congestion, and therefore requiring a much greater effort to plan and invest in? At the tactical level, the frequency and the modes of the different lines are set. Finally, the rosters and schedules of the personnel and vehicles are set at the operational level. Public transport design is a continuous and circular process. Once a design level is completed, does not mean that it is immutable. On the contrary, even after implementation, feedback from the ground should affect all levels of design, and these should then be amended accordingly. Public transport networks are historically laid out in a radial fashion. Radial networks, also known as hub-and-spoke networks, emerge out from the urban centers into the hinterland, like the spokes of a wheel. By catering mostly to the trips from the hinterland to the core, the radial approach manifests a design that requires destinations, other than the CBD, to have highly indirect travel. Radial networks are thus desirable only for trips to the core. A second network typology is the dispersed or multidirectional network, in which no discernible pattern exists and the go anywhere to anywhere approach is taken. The aim of this kind of network is to achieve seamless travel between the different lines, a state called the network effect. The network effect is achieved by conceptualizing lines not in isolation but as part of a network in which transfers, although undesirable by travelers, are indispensable. Finally, the fishbone kind of network is something in between the radial and the dispersed network design. It consists of a main trunk through the CPT, from which perpendicular lines emerge throughout its length. An example for such a network is Curitiba in Brazil. Curitiba was designed with public transport in mind and laid out around the main trunk. Although there is no readily available objective statistic by which one can identify whether a public transport network is a radial or dispersed design, the dispersed approach is deemed to be more effective, about as efficient, and more socially equitable than the radial approaches. Finally, having vehicles converging to a point makes radial networks become more susceptible to bus bunching. The country that has come closest to the state of the network effect is Switzerland. The small town of Schaffhausen, for example, surpasses even central Brisbane in the sheer number of journeys by public transport per head by about 4 times. In Zurich, one of the wealthiest cities in the world, public transport does not only have a sizable mode share, but has the admirable fact of being one of the few public transport systems in the world that not only has an ever-increasing modal share, but also enjoys patronage from the wealthier sections of society as well. This enviable result is achieved without imposing moral guilt on the population for not using public transport. Hence, Zurich can be regarded as the model city. Although topography may have played a part in Zurich's success, their success is achieved mostly by good planning, specifically by restrictions on parking, limited supply of road space, prioritization of public transport vehicles, increased pedestrian areas, good land use density, and urban structure. The result is a public transport system that, although comparable with other cities in terms of speed, is not hampered by traffic, and thus is able to serve more stops in the same time period as its contemporaries. Public transport networks can be designed in 4 stages. In the first stage, the flows of movement of people are understood. Where are trips starting from, and where do they end? How these flows change over the course of the day, the week, and the season. The information gained from the first stage would then help the planner build the network in the second stage. In this stage, the lines of the network are laid, and the general idea of the network takes shape. The third stage would entail the transformation of the lines into routes on the ground. In the fourth stage, the mode of each route is selected, and the timetable is set. Although different definitions for line and route exist in the literature, in this video are taken to mean as understood by Nielsen et al. And are as follows. A line is defined as the operational element of public transport, whereas route is defined as the physical location through which a vehicle passes. The lessons learned from Zurich, among other cities, has enabled Nielsen et al. To develop a set of guiding principles to help the public transport planner lay down the routes. After a route network is designed and laid down, its frequency and capacity requirements can then be calculated more precisely using Vuchic's guidance. Nielsen et al.'s first principle is travel time. Travel time is a major consideration when people decide whether to use public transport or not. Therefore, every effort must be made to decrease it. To decrease travel time, lines must be as long as possible to avoid transfers. Longer lines also have the added advantage of being more efficient because they reduce the total vehicle and driver turnaround times at the end of the lines, lessen the number of lines to administer, and lessen the number of lines to inform the public about. On the other hand, shorter lines are less susceptible to delays. Finally, lines should be sensitive to market demand, and therefore when a demand changes in a particular segment of the lines, wherever practical, the vehicle must also be changed. The total journey time by public transport that a traveler takes is affected by walking to the bus stop, access time, the number of bus stops on a line until egressing from the vehicle, walking from the bus stop, egress time, and the total journey length. Conversely, the speed of travel of the public transport vehicle itself depends on the distance between stops, the maximum speed of operation on the lines, the rate of acceleration, and the rate of deceleration at the stops. Increasing the operational speed not only reduces the travel time, but also has an added advantage of lowering the number of vehicles required to perform at the same frequency, thereby reducing costs. In order for operations to be sped up, it is imperative that public transport vehicles have priority treatment, not only in road planning, but also in traffic management measures, such as priority systems at traffic lights, control of priority lanes and signals. Operational speed is also affected by ticketing systems, location and distance between stops, stop design, and vehicle design. Although infrastructure may need to be adopted to cater for public transport, there is usually no need for very expensive infrastructures, such as underground systems. The second design principle is a simple and stable design. A public transport network is best designed to remain stable over time, so that it may influence land use development around it. It must not be tailor-made to specific markets, but ready to use from anywhere to anywhere. The design must also be flexible enough to be able to adapt to the demand. For the system to be as efficient as possible, and thus more competitive, travelers need to be directed onto the main corridors by making use of transfers. The need for efficiency, therefore, conflicts with the need to provide public transport access everywhere as a social commitment, and the need to reduce excess walking time. Furthermore, transfers are a disincentive for travelers, especially because they have to wait, though in practice a complicated system with direct lines requires much more planning effort and planning time. Hence, a public transport system that manages to reduce the discomforts of transfers whilst making use of them is the more desirable one. A public transport network should be conceived like a road network, with some parts capable of handling high demand at high speed, and others acting as feeders to the main arteries. Stability in the design is achieved when it contains the least number of lines as possible. Having as small number of lines as possible is also desirable because it makes the services easier to market, be remembered and be perceived by the travelers, while also simpler to plan and operate by the provider. A stable system reduces the risk of bus bunching or convoying, that is, buses servicing the same line arriving at a bus stop at the same time. Bus bunching increases the risk of congestion, delays buses at the bus stops, and confuses the traveler on discerning which vehicle he has to board at a bus stop. Stability, therefore, requires the important principle of the one section, one line, which demands that, as much as possible, an area is served by only one line. Flexibility and wide reach are then achieved by the provision of supplementary lines to the main trunk. These supplementary lines may not only consist of scheduled public transport services, but also other modes, such as taxis, demand-responsive services, and bicycles. Trunk corridors need to be simple and with a clear line structure, fast and with direct priority lanes. They need to have simple timetables, reliable operations, high-frequency services over most part of the day, and real timetable information on bus stops and on vehicles. Finally, trunk corridors need to be high-profile through the design of stops, vehicles, signs, and simple network maps. In order to increase comfort and reduce stopping time, vehicles need to have simple ticketing systems. Furthermore, vehicles operating on these lines need not only have real-time information, but also have a high level of comfort, ample capacity, and be low-floored. Finally, the interchanges at the trunk lines need to be both efficient and have a pleasant environment with low levels of air and noise pollution. Finally, the route alignment can make the difference between the failure and success of a system. Lines must preferably go through the service areas in a direct fashion, with no meandering. They should follow the natural direction of travel in the serviced area, thereby improving the chance of travel without transfer and avoiding servicing the same catchment areas. The third principle is frequency. Frequency is determined by market analysis and optimized by experience of the daily running of the system. A robust network design implies that the same line would have different frequencies during the day as the daily demand changes. Public transport providers are always under pressure to provide higher frequencies, even though increasing the frequency does not gather a proportional amount of profits. Furthermore, what frequency is acceptable differs between different locations depending on what the public has been used to. To be competitive with the car, public transport lines need to have lines with at most 15-minute headways. When all lines are high in frequency, the network effect is reached. This level of frequency is, however, not economically viable in low-density areas. For rural areas to be in a state of network effect, therefore, timetable coordination is crucial. Thank you for watching. If you want to delve deeper into how to plan a public transport network, I highly recommend the book by Nielsen et al. Called HiTrans Best Practice Guide Number 2, Public Transport Planning the Networks, and the book Urban Transport Operations, Planning and Economics by Vuchic. All references in this video are listed in the description box below. Bye bye and take care.